All right, guys, today we're going to be ranking all the episodes from the Justice League animated show from the early 2000s. I remember watching this as a kid, and now I'm in my 20s, and to this day, this is still one of my favorite shows. If you're interested in the world of DC and you want to see good takes on these characters, you got to check out this show. I'll do a separate video later on where we rank all the episodes of the sequel show, Justice League Unlimited. But today we're just focusing on Justice League. And most of these episodes are in parts of 3 or 2. So I'll just be ranking them as one whole episode. And you know what, off the bat, feel confident enough that nothing is going to go in D tier, so we can get rid of that. So let's start. Secret Origins. This is the first episode, parts 1 through 3. That's a good, solid B tier. The plot synopsis is Batman and Superman team up to deal with an alien invasion, and a telepathic message leads the duo to a military base housing future ally J'onn J'onzz, aka the Martian Manhunter. I think this is just a pretty good setup for the rest of the show. I think the team comes together in a coherent way. You kind of get to see Martian Manhunter's backstory through Mars and his civilization just getting freaking obliterated through the villain that they're fighting. It's just kind of this nameless, faceless entity. So that makes the plot kind of bland, pretty basic, but it works for the first group of episodes. Next is Darkest Night, and we're going to put this in C tier. The plot synopsis is Green Lantern, John Stewart, the GOAT Green Lantern. Get out of here with that Hal Jordan shit. He sucks. Green Lantern is brought up on charges of genocide and is forced to attend an intergalactic trial courtesy of the Manhunters, separate from Martian Manhunter. I think there's a fun little mystery about the crime and whatnot. I think it reveals a lot about John Stewart's character and how he's very honorable and man full of integrity. I just think there's better episodes that really look at the heart of his character. I just think this is like somewhat of a boring episode. The Manhunter's plan to take down Oa and the Guardians is just like so unbelievably convoluted. Doesn't really work for me. Now we get into a real good one. We got The Enemy Below. This is absolutely A tier. This is where Aquaman is introduced as the Justice League encounters an agitated Aquaman while trying to rescue a submarine crew. His opinion of the surface dwellers doesn't improve after an attempted assassination by Deadshot. I just gotta say, this Jason Momoa, he made Aquaman cool in live action, but this was the first cool version of Aquaman after like Family Guy and the Super Friends turned Aquaman into just a total freaking beta. As for this episode, I like the political tension within Atlantis, the political tension between Atlantis and the surface. I'm a sucker for moments of self-sacrifice, so the scene where he freaking cuts off his own arm to save his son is just peak television in my mind. Love this episode. Next is Paradise Lost. Rewatched this recently. I'm going to put it in B tier. Wonder Woman returns to Paradise Island after her abrupt departure, only to find the Amazons turned to stone. Sorcerer Felix Faust demands 3 mystical artifacts as the ransom. And I think compared to the Oa lore from the Green Lantern episode, I really like the mythological stuff and like dealing with the mascara. I like seeing Wonder Woman go on this video game like mission to get all the mystical artifacts. And I like how she's torn between her duty and her newfound humanity from being in the world and dealing with the Justice League, and also having to deal with the consequences of abandoning her mother and her sisters, and also having to deal with being exiled from the Mascara after bringing men, Batman, Superman, and so on, to the island. Also, Hades in the show kind of has aura, so that's worth mentioning. Next is Warworld. I think this is another B tier one. While handling an asteroid in space, Superman and Martian Manhunter are captured and banished to Warworld, a planet where combatants are forced to duel to the death. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. It's a very engaging plot. It introduces Mongol, who's a pretty serious threat to the Justice League. He's very powerful. He's a good villain. But watching Superman beat his ass at the end is great. So I think that can hang out in B tier. Then we got some Gorilla Grodd. I'm going to throw that in A tier. So The Brave and the Bold. Central City is under the rule of Gorilla Grodd, who plans on attacking Gorilla City with missiles. As Flash confronts the maniacal ape, the team races to stop the destruction. I like the lore behind Gorilla City and Grodd trying to expand it, but they're like telling him he's being a radicalist, so he's like, I'm gonna take down Gorilla City. Gorilla City did come before Wakanda though, which is kind of hilarious. But then there's this other plot. The Flash and Green Lantern are dealing with the apes, and then Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, Martian Manhunter are on their own figuring out what's going on. And I think the plots converge in a really satisfying way. I also love the scene at the end where Wonder Woman stops one of the missiles that Grodd launched, and she ends up buried beneath the rubble, and Batman goes to dig her out, and he's freaking out, and then she eventually powers her way out of the rubble, and you see his dirty hands, and he hides them in his cape. It's a really sweet scene. Excuse me. Next we have Fury, which is another episode that deals with the Themyscira story, and this is a surprising A-tier pull. The Justice League must battle a fanatical Amazon scheming to kill all the men in the world. I will say in this episode, it becomes pretty prevalent how horny these artists are, the women, and how attractive they draw them. Really becomes a problem in this episode with Arisia, who is the main villain, and I think her motivations are pretty interesting. She has this very radicalist approach, taking the Amazonian code and like trying to fulfill it to its logical extension, as Hawkgirl puts it in the episode. I think it's cool that we have this. Typically, the Amazonians are synonymous with allies to the Justice League, so I think it's cool that they have to go up against them. And I think there's a good twist at the end about how it was actually a man that saved Arisia when she showed up on Paradise Island, so kind of based, actually. Next, we're looking at Legends, and this is a high A-tier episode for sure. The plot is several of the Justice Leaguers are flung into another dimension populated with Green Arrow's childhood comic book heroes, the Justice Guild, who you can see in the picture. But the secret behind this reality threatens to destroy them all. I just think this is a really fascinating idea for an episode. You can see that most of the Justice Guild members are kind of mirror images or rip-offs of the Justice League, and then there's villains who are just, it's all just a very goofy world, but they can feel that something's off. And I think this is a really solid Jon Stewart episode, because you see that he's a military man and all this stuff, but he's really just this man-child who loves comic books and freaking snowball fight. It's awesome. And I don't want to put too many spoilers in here, but how everything goes down, it's really emotional watching him, or for him to watch his pretty much childhood heroes come to life and what they have to deal with. So I think this is a really good episode. Next is Injustice for All. This is another solid A-tier pull. Lex Luthor, who is diagnosed with kryptonite poisoning in this episode. I really like that. He is arrested, but then breaks out of prison to assemble a team of supervillains to help him destroy the Justice League once and for all. And I like that this is just a battle straight up good and evil. Team of supervillains, team of heroes. It's also one of the only episodes in the show where Joker's in it, and I still really like the DCAU take on the Joker with Mark Hamill. It's a really good Batman episode. He gets captured, and he has to talk his way out of a lot of stuff. Maybe he likes danger, And yeah, I just like the straight up fight between the good guys and the bad guys with an all-star lineup. Next is A Night of the Shadows. We can throw this in B tier. The plot is the League joins Etrigan, the demon, to battle sorceress Morgan Le Fay and her scheme of world conquest for her son. I think the backstory in this is pretty cool, between Jason Blood, a.k.a. Etrigan, and Morgan Le Fay. But I think the main pull of this episode is it really focuses on the sorceress tempting Martian Manhunter with these illusions of him seeing his wife and children again, and it's really powerful to see him overcome that. I think Flash sums it up well at the end where he goes, "So under all that green skin, I guess you're human after all." Great line right there. Next, we're getting towards the end of Season 1, is Metamorphosis. This is a fat C-tier pull. Not that it's a bad episode, but The synopsis is Green Lantern's friend is transformed into a monstrous elemental shapeshifter by his jealous employer and is tricked into thinking Green Lantern is responsible. The reason I'm not a big fan of this episode is I think Metamorpho is a cool hero and he's a really tragic origin story. I like the connection to Jon Stewart in this, but it's weird to have 2 episodes dedicated to the Justice League fighting a guy who ultimately joins, and then after this episode he gets almost no screen time, so it just felt like a little bit of a waste of time. But now we get our first S tier poll, The Savage Time, parts 1 through 3. So I think this is such a great idea for an episode. The Justice League go back in time to World War II to prevent the immortal Vandal Savage from using future technology to change history. I really like Vandal Savage as a villain. I'll say that off the bat. I haven't read any comics with him, so I don't know that much about him outside of the show. But it's not necessarily that he's super evil or power hungry. Those definitely play into his motivations, obviously. But because he's immortal, he's been around for all of human history, and he's seen world civilizations rise and fall, and he believes that he thinks he's figured it out. And so he thinks he knows how to rule, and so it's cool to take this real event that happened in our world, World War II, and then insert the superheroes into it, and they get separated, and they have to thrive on their own, particularly Jon Stewart. His ring runs out of power, and then he's put in this position where he's essentially joining the army again, and I think this is another really good Jon Stewart episode. I love the Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor romance. It feels very natural. Their conclusion is satisfying, and this is a very, very entertaining adventure episode. Next, we got another S tier poll. This is Twilight. The plot is Darkseid convinces the League to help him fight Brainiac from destroying his planet of Apocalypse. And to have Brainiac and Darkseid in the same episode is just so sick. These are 2 of the best DC villains of all time. We also have New Genesis and Highfather and Orion in this, and I just like the lore between New Genesis and Apocalypse, and there's just so many twists and turns in this episode. It's a roller coaster. I really like the moment where Superman, the world is collapsing, Brainiac's world is collapsing, and Superman, he just wants to fight Darkseid because he hates Darkseid, right? But Batman has the boom tube, he pulls Superman out of the collapsing world, so he doesn't leave him to potential death, right? And then there's this character named Forger. He lives below the planet of New Genesis, which is populated by gods. And I really like this part at the end where he shelters all the children from the battle that's waging above them. And then when they come out at the end and they see Highfather, the Forger says, "Forgive me for my presumption, Highfather." And Highfather, who this is probably the first time he's ever acknowledging Forger, informs him that he truly has a purpose and a place among them, which I think is really beautiful. Next is Tabula Rasa. This is a good B tier poll. Lex Luthor finds an extremely advanced android, Amazo, that can imitate superpowers and manipulates it to attack the Justice League. I just like this episode because it establishes Amazo as a legitimate threat, and you really feel afraid for the Justice League because, I mean, there's a part where if he looks at whoever he's fighting, their powers, he immediately inherits them. So there's a part where Superman shows up and they're trying to keep him from seeing Superman because once he gets that invulnerability, it's over. So the stakes feel pretty high, but it's an alright episode. Next, we got Only a Dream. This is B tier. I want to put it in A tier, but I'm putting it in B tier because part 1 is kind of lackluster. The plot is, with the other members of the Justice League trapped in their worst nightmares, Batman and Martian Manhunter have to defeat Dr. Destiny, it's a sick name, and save their team before it's too late. Part 1 is just a lot of setup. It's about this Dr. Destiny dude wanting to get back at his ex-girlfriend, which is kind of hilarious, but really picks up in part 2, because you see superheroes like Superman, Flash, and Hawkgirl, they're trapped in their worst nightmares. Superman's is that he can't control his power, so he's like too strong, so when he hugs Jimmy, he dies. Or he's on a date as Clark Kent with Lois Lane and he can't control his laser vision. Flash's is really interesting because he's just moving too fast that the rest of the world stops around him. And Hawkgirl's in this episode is that she can't fly, but I would have really liked if this episode came after the events of this show, like in Unlimited, because I think you really could have... Her character arc throughout this show is really good, and I think you really could have hammered home an interesting fear of hers. This is still a good episode. I like how the villain doesn't go into Batman's mind, because Batman tells him my head isn't a very nice place to be. And I don't know. I like the implied darkness and brokenness of that for Batman's character. So yeah, I'm going to rock with B tier there. Excuse me. Next we have Maid of Honor. This is a personal favorite, but I think objectively it's going to go in B tier. The plot is Princess Diana makes friends with a flighty princess of Casnia, only to discover her fiancé is the immortal supervillain Vandal Savage. And this is just a fun episode. This princess who Diana becomes friends with she's rambunctious. She takes Diana out dancing and clubbing and doing all this stuff. They're just partying. It's a lot of fun to watch. In the picture, you can see Diana, and that's her with Bruce Wayne, and he's just putting the moves on her. And this is a lot of fun to watch this Wonder Bat relationship. The dynamic is peak here. And this is also, I think, Vandal Savage at his most menacing and evil. So it's really, this is a good watch. Next is Hearts and Minds. This is C tier. This is probably the worst pair of episodes in the whole show. The plot is after learning of his mentor, Katma Tui's fallen battle, the Green Lantern John Stewart travels to a world at the edge of the galaxy to investigate. I'll be real, these episodes are just kind of boring, and the story isn't really relevant to the rest of the Justice League. It doesn't really add anything to the plot, other than it advances the Hawkgirl and Green Lantern love arc, which builds and builds as we dwindle down in Season 2. Next is A Better World. This is straight up S tier. These are two of the best episodes in the whole show. The plot is, in an alternate reality, a version of the Justice League known as the Justice Lords. You can see in the image, their suits are so sick. The Justice Lords discover the Justice League's world and plot to take it over. I think this episode has one of the best cold opens of all time. Maybe the best cold open for a superhero show. You see Batman and Wonder Woman fighting their way through the White House. Superman confronts Lex in the main White House room, whatever that shit's called. And he freaking kills him with his laser vision. And then it cuts to the theme song. And it's absolutely insane. But I don't know. I think this episode tackles interesting philosophical ideas on power and what is too little that the Justice League could have, and what does too much look like. Obviously, the Justice Lords have too much as they kind of rule as dictators over their universe, so it's a nice kind of back and forth on where the line is for these heroes. And yeah, these episodes set up the entire plot of Justice League Unlimited, so these are pretty important episodes. Next, we have Eclipse. This can go kind of middle B tier. The plot is, released by a soldier, an evil entity takes control of various people and threatens the world. It's a pretty basic plot, pretty straightforward, makes it a pretty basic episode, but what is awesome about it is this entity takes control of every member of the Justice League except for Flash. So this is a really fun Flash episode to see him struggle against his team. And, I mean, Flash is one of the most fun and exciting characters in the show, so this is a great episode. Next, we have The Terror Beyond. And honestly, the episodes themselves are kind of C tier, but the messaging, I honestly think, is so powerful and good, I'm going to put it in A tier. The plot is Dr. Fate and Aquaman wanted to sacrifice Grundy to prevent the return of a mystic being. But this being has already arrived, and Aquaman leaves to protect Atlantis. Hawkgirl finds out the being had visited her homeworld of Thanagar long ago. As you can tell by the synopsis, there's just a lot going on here. The writing's not very tight. There are some points where the animation looks just different than it usually does. It looks kind of wonky. But the whole point of it, you got to watch it to really understand it, is just the power of faith. Hawkgirl pretty much tells the Justice League that she's an atheist, and Wonder Woman, who obviously comes from a very religious background, just shares that she doesn't know how she could go on without faith. And then by the end of the episode, Solomon Grundy, who's a dead man, right? He doesn't have a soul in the show. All he wants is that. All he wants is to taste the afterlife, and Hawkgirl doesn't understand how he could have joy till the end, and Aquaman tells her it's because of faith. And I just think the messaging in a kid's show, it's tackled with such gentleness and simplicity that it's unbelievable how well it's done. So for that reason, it's going in A tier. Next, we have Secret Society. This is a high A tier episode, for sure. While the Justice League is experiencing serious internal friction, Gorilla Grodd carefully assembles a well-organized supervillain team to attack it. And this episode is pretty similar to Injustice for All, where it's just all-star lineup of villains versus the Justice League, good versus evil. It's a lot of fun, but I think this episode carries more emotional weight because of the internal turmoil going on between the Justice League. So when they're able to work through that and overcome it, it just feels a lot more rewarding. Next is Hereafter. This is my personal favorite episode of the show. This is S tier by so far. I'll try not to spoil that much because this is just... I think if you were to just watch any episode in isolation of the show, it's Hereafter Part 1 and Part 2. Because let me read the plot first and then I'll describe it. During a battle with Calibac, Livewire, Weather Wizard, and Toyman evidently kills Superman. And what's so awesome about this is there's just too many people out there. We need to have a serious extermination of people who are under the impression that Superman is boring. Because you just got to go watch these episodes because these will show you that he is not. He's a very cool and interesting, and he's just the best character. Yeah, and so what happens is everyone thinks Toyman, he blasts Superman with this thing, and then Superman disappears. And people think he's dead, and everyone's just shocked. And there's like several seconds of silence before Wonder Woman explodes up. She freaking rips Toyman out of a machine, and she tells him she's going to kill him. And before she can land her punch, Flash comes up and stops her fist, and says that's not how we deal with our enemies. And Wonder Woman, with tears in her eyes, says, "Speak for yourself." And Flash goes, "I'm speaking for Superman." And I think it's just beautiful to see that Superman's strong moral principles can rub off on the Justice League. Even though Wonder Woman is having a moment of hurt and brokenness, it's still... These are beautiful episodes with Batman. He spills his heart at Superman's memorial as well. So these are great episodes. Definitely give them a watch so you can have your brain chemistry changed on why Superman is actually awesome. Next is Wild Cards. We'll throw these in B tier. The Joker creates havoc in Las Vegas with his Royal Flush Gang. I like that it's a simple plot. It takes place on a small scale, so it's pretty entertaining. What I don't like about it is Joker essentially narrates the whole episode, and that gets kind of annoying. And it's shot like it's a news broadcast, so that's just kind of weird. But it further advances the Green Lantern and Hawkgirl subplot, which gets pretty steamy in this episode. Next is Comfort and Joy. This is absolutely S tier. This is just a Christmas episode for the Justice League. I think this has the potential to be the best Superman, Flash, Martian Manhunter, maybe even Green Lantern episodes in the show. It all reveals a lot about the true hearts of their characters. For Flash, I guess every Christmas he goes to this orphanage, asks the kids what they want, and he goes and gets them for them. But the toy they want is sold out, so he goes all over looking for it. And I think it just shows how much he cares. He cares so much about the people around him. And I think it's really evident in this episode. For Superman and Martian Manhunter, Superman takes J'onn J'onzz to Smallville to hang out with Ma and Pa Kent for Christmas. And one complaint I do have about the DCAU is their Clark Kent isn't great. He's too similar to Superman in terms of his personality. He's just not this goofy, oafy, clumsy farm boy. He's just the same as Superman. But in this episode, I really like that he has that personality. Like, there's a scene where he's talking to Martian Manhunter, and while he's talking, he hears Pa Kent from downstairs go, "Okay, guys, I'm going to light the tree." And Clark stops his sentence and turns and starts running down the stairs, and he goes, "Pa, that's my job." I just love scenes like that. Or later on, they're having dinner. Ma and Pa Kent are telling Martian Manhunter that they used to have to wrap Clark's presents with lead lining, otherwise he'd peek at them. And Clark kind of glares at them and he goes, "You mean Santa wrapped them?" And it's just awesome that for all his otherworldly, all his godly abilities, that Superman is still so wholesome to believe in Santa. And this is a great Martian Manhunter episode. He goes around and explores Smallville, and I think he's really just exposed to a lot of what humanity is actually like, and he's trying to build that connection with them. And then for Green Lantern, you just get to see him be that man-child, and it's awesome to see him in that environment. Lastly, we got Starcross. This is another just S tier poll. I've talked a lot about this episode in a previous video, how the DCU should end, but the plot synopsis is Hawkgirl's people, the Thanagarians, arrive to the planet to offer the planet protection from another alien race threatening to invade Earth, but all is not what it seems. And yeah, I really like in this episode that the Justice League, they kind of become outlaws and they have to like work in the shadows as ordinary citizens. And these episodes are just filled with heroic moments, character arcs, character twists, redemption, and I just absolutely love these episodes. There's also a nice, steamy Diana and Bruce kiss, so that alone should be enough for you to at least go check out these episodes. But check out the whole show. I think this is a great show. Like I said, I'll be back ranking every episode of Justice League Unlimited, which is the sequel show, and I appreciate you watching.